Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Today is Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. So if you're new to these broadcasts, you can submit questions if you're watching this live at any point. And then after I go through some of the pre-submitted questions, I'll get to the questions that have come in live. Some of these questions have come into me throughout the week. Some of these have come into me as I've had conversations with parents or people considering the program. So I'm going to get into the pre-submitted ones first, but like I said, feel free to submit your questions at any time. First question is, how do I know whether I'm caught in a power struggle or I'm holding firm to a boundary? Um, First of all, I think it's important to understand that this is the essence of the work, right? This is the essence of doing your own work, of finding yourself in this process. I think it's the same kind of question that people ask when they're in a difficult relationship as a couple or in a couple relationship. So part of it is this becomes your life work. For those of you who might be new to Evoke's broadcast, you'll understand that part of what distinguishes what we're teaching from other models or psychoeducation is that we're not going to give you a set of a template to follow to figure out the equation. It's really about inviting you into a deeper awareness of yourself, a more conscious version of yourself. So this question becomes your life question, and I think the only problem is if we're not asking that, right? If we're not even considering that as one of the problems. Because for myself, still, even though I'm well educated, I've been doing my own work for a lot of years, I still find myself on one side of this equation or the other with some confusion. So that's why we believe so strongly in parents doing their own work. That's why I talk about with couples that it's important to do your own work, not just couples therapy, but to do your own work principally. I've shared with you many times that part of my work in individual therapy that I do each week is about parenting. Part of it's about being in a relationship with my wife. Part of it's about being in a relationship with others, including people that I work with and my clients. So the work becomes finding a sense of yourself as the foundation for everything else. And when we lack clarity um, about who we are, setting a boundary, we have no basis for it. There's no reference point. So we must make it a priority to do our own work first. That's really the foundation of all of this. And our relationship with everybody else falls in behind, in some respects, our relationship with ourselves. That's why I believe so strongly in the individual intensives that we do. I'm going to talk about that a little later with one of the questions that came up recently about that. But it's really about finding yourself. And I'm going to tell you what it's not. What it's not an answer that I can give you. Right? I can ask questions. I can have my suspicions. I can teach you how to think about the process, but I can't tell you where to draw lines in your life because part of it is based on how you feel and what you want. So how can I possibly know that unless you tell me that? Unless you tell me what you want. So you find yourself first. You make that the project. If there's one simple thing I can say for those of you new to this part of this work, it is that your children don't need you to be perfect, and if they do, they're doomed. Everybody is. But what they do need from you is to make your journey your project. They need you to stop making them the principal project and start making your journey and your work your project. That relieves an extraordinary weight from their shoulders. And on top of whatever mental health or addiction they might be dealing with, it frees them up to kind of sort themselves out. And then you become a resource, right? You become a resource to them instead of a liability. The next question, what should I do when my insecure self shows up? Tell her it will be okay? Question mark. I think that we're taught to hate, to dislike, or at least to be ashamed of our insecurities, our fears, our difficulties, our struggles, our symptoms. And if that worked, we wouldn't need therapy, frankly, because we're taught very young what things about us not to like, not to accept. And while that can keep us between the guardrails for some time, it oftentimes backfires and comes at quite a cost. And so part of therapy is finding somebody who can do what I'm about to explain to you so that you can do it for yourself, is to find somebody who can sit with you, who can be gentle and kind and compassionate and curious with your symptoms, with your insecurities, with your neuroses, your anxiety, your depression, to treat it like a little child, to say, I'm here for you. What do you want to tell me? I had a colleague ask me a question very similar to this recently. I was doing some training and I said, don't tell it what to do. Tell it that you understand it. Hear it. Listen to it. Tell that part of yourself that you're there for it. But because we've been taught to dislike or to hate those parts of ourselves, we shun it and shove it in a corner. And in that place, it gets no help. In that place, that dark part of ourselves, it becomes problematic and symptomatic, and it leaks. It gets manifested through some kind of symptom, addiction, neuroses, something like that. So we learn to sit with the parts of ourselves that we've been told are unacceptable. And we do that, at least in my experience, the most effective way we learn to do that is by sitting with somebody who can do the same thing. And I want to be emphatic about this. That is an extraordinarily rare person. I've had the luck of finding a therapist myself who can do that. I've talked to clients recently, former Evoke clients, where they've made the decision to depart, to leave their therapist because they felt like their therapist had too much anxiety to fix them. And it made them feel uncomfortable. And after confronting the therapist, after challenging the therapist maintained a dismissive attitude until finally they had to leave. People have told me that recently. So find somebody who's, first of all, doing their own work so that they have the capacity to sit with you. And the healing takes a long time. That's why we do Evoke's wilderness therapy program and intensive therapy program, because we try to kind of condense the work. As many of you know, several weeks in wilderness therapy is like several months or longer in outpatient therapy. Several days in a therapeutic intensive at Evoke is like several weeks or several months of outpatient therapy. You immerse yourself in the work. So, next question. My son turns 18 in 3 months. What should I expect leading up to this? The first thought that I have is be skeptical of anything he may threaten. I have had clients in our program virtually threaten everything leading up to their 18th birthday, and some of them followed through and some of them didn't. So it's irrelevant or unimportant to pay too much attention, to hold on too tightly to the threat. Second of all, the idea, in a sense, often is to threaten mom and dad to capitulate, to change. So the work leading up to his 18th birthday, your work leading up to his 18th birthday is to get a sense of yourself, where you stand, what you're willing and not willing to tolerate, to support, and getting as clear as you can about that and that project, so that when your son or daughter turns 18, you know where you stand. And if your son threatens he's going to walk away, okay. If he threatens that he's going to not talk to you anymore, I mean, think about the reason behind that, the reasoning behind that. I'm not going to give up some important and core values because you threaten to abandon me. If I'm willing to give up my line, whatever that is, and I'm not telling you what it is, But if I'm willing to give up my line that I draw in the sand, capitulate to you so that you don't abandon me, first of all, I've already abandoned myself. And second of all, I've already abandoned you. Because it's not about whether or not the child leaves the parent. That's not the equation. I always say that if my adult children said that they didn't want to talk to me anymore, my response I would ask questions, of course, and see if they wanted to talk about it. But ultimately, if that were their decision, my response would be, I support you. I wouldn't want you to be in any relationship with me or anyone else that you felt was toxic or harmful. I would support my clients in that if they made an effort and tried to work it out and felt like ultimately that a relationship was toxic, I would support my adult clients 10 times out of 10 in setting that boundary. But here's the wonderful takeaway. If you're that way with your children, they won't want to cut you out unless it's just merely manipulation because you've changed the pattern of succumbing to their manipulation and you're not willing to do it anymore. Then they might be willing to do it. But really, the equation in parenting is about whether or not we're there for them, not whether they're there for us. That's not what it's about. It's not what it ought to be about. We're there for ourselves so that we can be there for them. Here's a longer one somebody asked me today. My question for you is this. What is the impact of a child being seen or known by the same gender parent versus the other gender parent? I often hear you talk about single parents fighting a fight with one hand tied behind their back. You also regularly affirm that one parent who truly sees and knows a child is enough, but two parents is ideal. This makes me wonder, what is the role of gender regarding the parent who is providing the support and the child needing it? As a mother, I am trying to be the parent who contains my children's feelings and who sees them fully, but I am raising two boys that are not getting that at all from their father. I'm trying to understand what part gender plays in the development into men, or when they are only seen by their mother and not their father. This was an interesting question. I got it early this morning, and it's multidimensional. First of all, the role of a father or a mother in a family is not consistent across families. There are patterns that in certain cultures tend to be present with male fathers, female mothers. So that's the first thing. It's more about the position that they occupy. So an absent father, which would be a typical kind of scenario that we deal with in therapy in the United States. An absent father is going to leave a certain kind of gap for a son and a certain kind of gap for a father. For a father, for a son, excuse me, he doesn't see himself, right? He doesn't get to be around a father who models for him what it's like to be present and engaged, right? He seeks his approval, wants to live up to him. A daughter might more commonly want the attention, the affection of a father who's not present. Not so much about identifying with him in a more literal sense, but just the lost affection, the lost attention. So then how they go out in the world impacts them. And take a mother for that matter. A mother's role, principally in the United States, still, although it can flip, but still is the nurturing primary parent. The research still shows us, even in dual income families, more often than not, the mother serves as the primary parent figure. So that becomes weighted with a certain kind of importance. So a mother that's not present for a daughter, again, she doesn't get to see herself. She doesn't identify with a mother who's acting in ways that aren't helpful or nurturing or consistent. The daughter doesn't see somebody like her that's doing those things. So she loses part of that identity. A son whose mother is not nurturing and present and consistent has a certain kind of hole in him. right? Where he'll seek after or seek comfort if he's heterosexual, or maybe just not even in romantic relationships, he'll seek relationships to kind of fill that void. So it's not so much gender to gender and how moms affect daughters and how sons affect fathers. It's really about, as I thought about this morning when it got sent and I started to go through all the potential iterations of fathers and mothers and daughters and sons, I started to think it's so complex. Really, the story is one for the child to tell. There are some common themes, but they can cross over gender. Who's the primary parent? Who's the parent that um, has the most power in the family? That makes a difference. Firstborns tend to identify with the parent with the most power, with the dominant culture in the family. Secondborns tend to challenge that. So I go back to what you quoted me as saying, which is this. Anytime you're a single parent or a parent, the only parent who's willing to do some of this work, this therapeutic self-help work in a family, you're fighting a battle with one hind tied behind your back. But it makes a dramatic difference no matter which gender you are. If you see and resonate and provide a healthy attachment for your child. And it creates quite a dent if you're not present, quite a hole if you're not present or you're abusive or neglectful in some way. So the job for the child, which we all become the adult eventually, ideally, right, is to figure out what that dent looks like. What's its shape? What's its feeling? I didn't have a father present myself. I got to figure out what that left for me as a man, as a father, as a husband. I had a mother who was present, but had many limitations. What are those limitations? What are the shape of those limitations and how do they affect me? That's my job in therapy and has been for the past 50 years to sort that out. So that's why I probably go back to the simple statements that you quoted me as saying. And then I'll just add to that the job of a therapist, I think, the job of anybody who wants to be helpful to anybody else is to listen in such a way that somebody can discover their truth. And truth isn't psychobabble, it's just feelings, experiences, history, perceptions, wants, dislikes, loves, fears, insecurities, strengths, assets, right? Just all the aspects of a self, of a person. So it becomes our job. We don't even have to know too much. It becomes our job to listen. I have some familiar landscapes committed to memory because I do this for a living. There are things that I see in children and in families and in couples that I recognize, but I have to be careful of that. I also have to maintain a significant amount of not knowing. My therapist taught me this and teaches me this all the time. It's really important to show up not knowing. The greatest therapist, she always teaches. The greatest therapists are ones who pride themselves on what they don't know and what they haven't said in therapy. So you listen. You let them tell their story. And one last thing I'll add to this with this question, because if you have a co-parent that's not participating, you can easily have anger and resentment for what they're doing that's harmful or not doing that creates harm in your child. You can feel that. So it's very important that you take care of that somewhere, ideally with a therapist, a sponsor, somebody, so that you don't act in such a way as to project that onto the child, right? To get the child to speak to your pain, to your anger. So it's very important you separate out your pain and anger toward your co-parent because of what they've done that's harmful and the child and give that to the child. So take care of yourself somewhere else. I hope that's helpful. I know it's not but it can't be a simple answer. Next question. How can I find a therapist who understands this work? I wasn't sure if this was an intensives question or a wilderness question. Um, I wrote a couple of things that talk about this. The first one is a blog that I wrote. So if you go to my website, drbradreedy.com, there's a blog there called Looking for a Therapist Who Looks for You. It's really based on a journal article my wife and I wrote. If you Google Brad Reedy and therapy versus psychology, you'll find it. But I've listed the website here on the screen for those of you that are watching. It's on the natsap.org website. It's the Journal of Therapeutic Schools and Programs, Volume 9. Volume 9, Edition 9, article number 6. So you can go there, but just Google Brad Reedy and therapy versus psychology. Most importantly, it goes back to what I was saying. Tools, theories, skills, ideas, insight from a therapist, all are helpful resources. But they can eclipse the therapist, the client. They can get in the way of seeing the client. And if they are present in such a way that they're fueled by a therapist's anxiety to fix, the therapist need to be helpful, right? If they're fueled with that or by that, the problem becomes that the client doesn't get seen. You're really in the business in therapy then of working out what the therapist's needs are, not the client's needs are. And that's what happened to us when we were children, right? But because so few of us experience it as children and so few of us experience it as clients, we don't know what it looks like to have a therapist who's not working out principally their stuff in therapy, but they're out there. A lot of them are based in attachment theory. They understand child development. They come from a developmental model, a humanistic model. They look up to people like Carl Rogers and D.W. Winnicott, Melanie Klein, right? They might have an analytic kind of foundation for them. But most importantly, you just tell them what you need. In these articles, I talk about this. You tell them what you need, and if they make it about you having a problem, you might have to find a new therapist. If you get upset or hurt or frustrated with something they're doing and you tell them and they tell you why you're wrong, you might need to find a new therapist. My daughter, who's getting her PhD in clinical psychology, she's learned this from me because she's worked for us for the past 5 years, worked for me for the past 5 years. I was been teaching her this for a long time, and she said, one of her professors said to her, Dad, one of my professors said, if a therapist makes an interpretation that the client doesn't agree with, the interpretation is wrong. It's kind of a fundamental understanding of what it means to resonate with a client. I used to, when I was younger, I prided myself in my ability to kind of surgically cut through and identify people's defenses. And I thought I was being brave in doing so. But I never really counted or considered what it felt like on the other end of the equation. And it took years before clients would tell me it was humiliating and they felt defenseless. So have a therapist who's willing to look at themselves, do their own work. Have a therapist that doesn't have the inclination to make you wrong when you get upset when you get upset with them. Learn to have a therapist that can say, I'm sorry, I messed up. That models what it is to be a person and meets you where you're at. And share with them some of the stuff that you're doing. Why should I attend an intensive? Somebody asks, just because my child is in the wilderness. Well, the answer is don't attend an intensive just because your child is in the wilderness. Attend an intensive because, in my experience, it's the best, most impactful thing you can do for yourself and all of your relationships. The only thing is that you're hearing about it through a therapist who runs and started a wilderness therapy program, but that's just a coincidence. I shared on social media a couple of years ago the idea it said that I put on there said, if you don't think you need therapy, it's one of the biggest signs that you need therapy. And then one of my colleagues and friends wrote and he said, I know that I need therapy. So do I not need it then? And I said, no, you just don't need it as bad as the others. Therapy is just bad therapy stinks. Bad therapy is horrible. Bad therapy feels miserable, makes you feel more frustrated. Good therapy meets you where you're at and gives you what you need. When you present yourself with struggles, the therapist responds with understanding your struggles, empathizing. No matter how neurotic or silly or crazy you think or somebody thinks your symptoms are, a good therapist will understand and even honor the symptoms. So you do it because it's just a better way to live. It's not a dependency. It's not a crutch any more than eating healthy or going to a gym, using a physical trainer, going to a medical doctor, right? Having a professor teach you about math or English or the humanities. All of those would be crutches then, right? Anybody that then in our life provides us with some wisdom or experience that helps us to grow and expand. But we have so much shame about needing. We have so much shame about mental health. Like I said in the beginning, we've been taught to dislike, to have a disdain for our symptoms. The second part of the question that this person asked was, should I do a family or a co-parent or an individual one? If you haven't done a lot of work, I would strongly recommend a individual intensive first. Strongly. I haven't been to a couples therapy session in 10 years. But you better believe that the work that I do in individual therapy is about my marriage. It's the foundation of the work. I believe in couples therapy. I provide it for people. I believe in family therapy. My degree, my doctoral degree is in marriage and family therapy, so I believe in it. But sometimes we can become distracted. Sometimes we can secretly wish that the therapist is going to shape everybody else up in our family. We can have a bias against being able to see our part, our contribution to the issue. So consider individual work first. And then systems work, that is couples work or family work, systems work, then becomes a way to kind of bridge together everybody's individual work, right? Let's find some common language. Let's find some shared tools and ideas that can help us to kind of navigate the challenges. Someone told me just before I started, my son accuses me of making my apologies about me instead of about him, the hurt that he feels. Any advice? Ideally, an apology is given with very little expectation of any return, including forgiveness. An apology is given from a place of abundance, not shame or guilt. So you give it lightly. That means you give it ideally without any expectation of any kind of return. In fact, one thing I've been paying attention to the last couple of years is how when I apologize to my family members, that they oftentimes get more angry after the apology. And at first, I was thinking years ago that I wanted to interrupt them and said, "Hey, I just apologized." But part of what happens when you apologize to somebody is you're validating their hurt and their pain. You're kind of shining a light on it, and so it's going to get larger, right? You're suggesting that you want to listen to their pain, their hurt, their frustration, and their anger. So pay attention to your expectations. Pay attention to um, what you might think you want in return. And sometimes you don't know that until afterwards. Sometimes it's not apparent to you until after you apologize and you don't get the response that you want. So just pay attention to that feeling afterwards. What are you hoping for, expecting? What are you disappointed in? All right, I have a list of questions that have come in. Let me see what we have. Are there any differences in setting boundaries with kids that are older than 18 years old? Can you provide some advice to a parent whose kid was diagnosed with BPD? I'll answer both of those. Um, First of all, there's lots of differences, but fundamentally, the core work is the same. So that's a political way to say it's both. The core issues are the same. My 12-year-old and my 27-year-old, that's the range of my children as of today. My 12-year-old, my 20-year-old obviously have to make different decisions around support and boundaries and privileges and rewards and so forth. But the core work is the same, right? Where I stand, what I want, knowing myself. It's in the approach, right? What I feel comfortable with, what I don't feel comfortable with. It's in that sensibility. And then the the difference is just in the details. And yeah, it's not. I tell parents to begin a simple mantra, to begin to operate from this simple idea of this is what I feel comfortable with. So for my 12-year-old, she wanted to go hang out with somebody the other day that I didn't feel comfortable with the situation. So the answer is I don't feel comfortable with it. My 24-year-old asked me to co-sign on a lease, and my answer was I don't feel comfortable with that. Right? What the problem is we try to we want to be right. Right? We want to get it right. And boundaries and having a self are not about being right. And it's confusing. It's not an amoral position or sensibility. It's a different sensibility that's really rooted in love and authenticity, curiosity, courage, vulnerability, and strength, right? It comes from those places. But it doesn't come from a sense of righteousness or some guarantee that if I flip the right switches that I'll get the outcome that I want. You know, it's that thinking, in fact, that if I flip all the right switches, I can get the outcome that I want. It's that thinking that becomes the problem. And especially if you have somebody with bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder, excuse me. My therapist taught this to me some years ago in working with people with borderline personality disorders. If you don't know what that is, it's a very dysregulated person who is sabotaging, self-sabotaging, has a very difficult time in relationships, very challenging for many, many people. And when my therapist was a younger therapist working on a unit in a mental health hospital with a bunch of borderline patients, and she saw how the staff were running in circles. These clients, these patients were causing all kinds of havoc on the unit. She came to realize this one concept, which is you can't win. You can only choose how to lose. And I've chosen to apply that maxim to any difficult boundary. You cannot win. You just get to choose how to lose. If you try to win, they will make you lose. Right? That's the game. The name of the game with people with borderline personality or children or somebody in our relationship that we're at odds with, the name of the game is you lose. End of game. So then we start to find a different reference point. And the reference point is healthy self-care, right? Love and compassion for yourself. And then giving that to others. But I'm going to repeat it again because it's worth repeating. It's worth committing to memory and thinking of it as a mantra. So many times when people ask me a question in therapy that I can tell is unwinnable, my response is to teach them, to tell them this story that I've just told you, and to tell them you don't get to win this one. You just get to choose how to lose. And that, in essence, is the key or a key to the establishment of healthy boundaries. How can I help support our nephew if we cannot write him? Will there be a way for us to do that? Great. First answer that question is you're doing it now. Listen to the podcast. Learn what he's learning. Wait just a little while. Eventually, you're going to be able to write him. But what the children would benefit most from extended family, and parents for that matter, doing is learning what they're learning. They're going to be strangers. They're going to be, because of their mental health or addiction issues, they're going to come out of this experience kind of weird. They're going to be knowing things and ideas and concepts that most adults don't know. And so it'll feel alien to them to be in the world. So listen to a handful of the podcasts. Read one of the books that they're reading. Learn what they're learning. And then when you do get to write them or see them, ask lots of questions and be curious. Most important, and I beg of this for all of you, most important, talk as well as you can about your own issues with mental illness. And you don't have to be diagnostically mentally ill, but just talk about your anxiety. Talk about your insecurities. Talk about your vulnerability to peer pressure, no matter how old you are. Talk about bouts of depression if you've struggled. Talk about if you join them there, right? If you can relate to them, learn part of what they're learning, relate to them, ask them questions, share a bit of your own vulnerability to them. You cannot imagine how healing that is for them. They don't need you to be experts. They don't need a pep talk. They don't need you to cheer them up. They don't need you to be the leader and the mentor, unless, of course, we consider leading and mentoring modeling vulnerability. Then that would be helpful. But just lean into the work yourself. Now, I love the fact that an aunt or an uncle are on this right now. That, to me, warms my heart. When you get to write them, tell them you attended one of these and asked questions and didn't know. Ask them how they would answer the question that I just asked. I had a young woman, sibling of a client of mine years ago. She called me in preparation for seeing her younger brother. They were both young adults. She called me to ask about any advice that I might have. She was nervous. She didn't want to say the wrong thing. She didn't want to do anything that would trigger a setback in her brother. Now, she was the good one. She was the successful one. And her brother, who'd gone through our program and now was in a sober living environment, her brother was the one who was flawed, right? He was the screw up in the family. So she's asking me what she can do to get it right. And I said to her, the best thing you could do is just tell him that you're nervous and that you don't know what to say. Ask him. For once, let him be the expert. Let him be the one to teach you. For once, have a conversation where he knows something more than you, more on a topic than you do. It was simple. It was clear to me. And her response, no way. No way was she willing to do that. Too hard, too vulnerable. It threatened the role that she had occupied in her family, which was the good one, the competent one. So she couldn't show up not knowing. So you could learn from her and do that same, follow that same suggestion. My child is currently at Evoke. He's been in wilderness for 16 weeks. Um, is being in wilderness for 16 weeks too long, and will it raise red flags? It's a long one. That's a long stint. It just is what my son, as a matter of fact, it wasn't over 16 weeks, but when my oldest, my 27-year-old, who's been sober for 10 years and graduates this semester with his master's degree. I'm not saying that as a point of pride, just to give you a contrast from where he was uh, 13 years ago. He was there for exactly 16 weeks. Some of my favorite people on the planet have been to treatment. I was sent away as a teenager. Those are my people. I trust them, right? They're deeply feeling people. And they learn things that people who don't have to go through those difficult situations or circumstances don't learn. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything other than he needs more support, more help. It's a long time, for sure. Much, much longer than our average. But it just means what it means for him. Really, you know what it is, folks. The enemy is fear, right? As a father, a therapist for that matter, or husband, the enemy is fear, anxiety, another word for fear. So when we show up in our relationships afraid, which is natural, it's very natural to show up afraid because things are scary. But when we show up afraid, then the other person has to take care of us, or they feel the pressure or the pull to take care of us. So we make it our project to take care of our fear in other places. Therapy, Al-Anon, podcasts, books, any kind of support groups you can get to. We make it our project to take care of, to talk about, to unload our fear in those places so that when we show up to the child, we show up in support of them, able to be there for them. So good question. And because you're an outlier, it makes sense. Somebody says, but therapy can also not make you feel good. It should be making you think in a different way, and sometimes that can be uncomfortable. It's not about feeling good. Sometimes that's what people hear. It's sometimes I have to grieve, right? Sometimes I have to deal with pain. Sometimes change is terrifying. So all of those things are a part of therapy. It's about feeling everything. But in all of that, the difference that gets made in effective therapy is I'm not alone. That's the biggest difference. And so in my pain and my grief and my loss and my sadness and my fear and my insecurity that I can get in touch with in therapy, I'm not alone. And there's something particularly sweet about that. So you're right. My therapy work hasn't always been painless. It's sometimes very, very painful. But what I've had the gift of because of my therapist is I'm not alone. So it's bearable. How do I approach and work on alcoholic husband and 20-year-old addiction to cannabis? What you do is you go to Al-Anon. If you have somebody that you love or in your life who is an addict or struggling with mental health, you go to a support group. I'm going to pull up the slide for those of you watching. You go to a support group. These are groups that are made for people who have loved ones that are struggling with addiction. And what you won't get there is tools for how to fix them, but you'll get tools for how to maintain your own clarity, serenity, right? Your own emotional sobriety, so to speak. So that's the answer to the question. Curing one's codependency. I think there's a harmful message sometimes in the work that we do. And the harmful message is that curing your codependency, my codependency, will cure the addict in our lives. And that's absolutely not necessarily true. Curing our codependency does one thing, it cures our codependency. Then we learn how to relate to those in our lives who struggle in these ways. Then we make decisions based on our recovering codependency, or it's really a recovering attachment wound. We make our decision based on that instead of the place of fear or confusion that is inherent in a fractured attachment that we call codependency. So why is wilderness therapy more intense and concentrated than a regular residential program? First of all, it's uncomfortable. You have to deal with the elements, right? I'm in an air conditioned or heated room right now. When I go out there, I have to deal with things outside of my control. You've just placed yourself in a situation that replicates the way that the universe works, which is there are things that you're outside of control with. So it's raw. There are two, I should have these up here every time. It just came out this week at Harvard. You can Google Harvard Business School Leadership and Wilderness Therapy. Okay, it just came out this week. Harvard is finally learning that instead of classes or exercises, that wilderness treks, adventure trips, do more to facilitate growth in the participants. And they even cite one that I've cited for a while, NASA, right? NASA uses wilderness therapy for its astronaut teams if they haven't worked together to build trust. It's immersive, it's intense, it's raw, it's you can't get out of it. You have to deal with it. It rains, it snows, there's bugs, it's hot. You have to work together. It creates vulnerability. Every single thing becomes a microcosm. It's like you're turning up the volume on life. It creates vulnerability and it requires trust and communication. It becomes this rich microcosm for life. And our research has shown us that when we turn wilderness therapy just to outdoor exercises or games or lessons, the more contrived the activities in wilderness therapy, the less effective, the less its impact. So it's just the raw experience of being out there. Everything becomes a metaphor. You don't, to get a fire, you have to rub sticks together. There's no parent involved in that, right? There's no rule. It's just nature. I remember when I went out to visit my son in thunderstorms. I'd been a wilderness therapist for over 10 years at the time that I visited my son. And I remember during my visit, I'm like, I wish it would just stop raining so I could focus and concentrate on my visit with my son. And then I remembered. I remember one time in the winter, it was actually in October, which is really cold because it's raining and wet. It's hard to get a fire. And I was having sessions. And I said to Stephen, the staff member, in between one of my sessions, I said, Stephen, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to convince me why I shouldn't have the rest of my sessions in my car. And he said, just show the kids how to struggle. And that's all the time he needed. I was convinced. I remembered, I just need to show them it's okay for it to be hard. So everything becomes this lesson. And it's not coming from therapists or parents necessarily. It's coming from the world. It's outside of everybody's control. So you can read those articles from Harvard or from NASA. The NASA one is talked about. Adam Grant has a podcast. Adam Grant, he's a organizational psychologist. I think it's called This Life with Adam Grant. He talks about the NASA teams, about how to build trust at the workplace. Somebody says, my younger brother is at Wilderness. How can I support him while he's there? What kind of letters should I write? Similar to, I don't know if you were on when I was answering the question about the nephew. Study this stuff. Read some of the books that he's being asked to read. Ask what he's being asked to read. And then ask him questions and let him teach you. And if you have the courage to do it, relate to him. You might not have gotten in the same kind of trouble that he got into, or you'd probably be here, but relate to him, relate to anxiety, depression. You might not use drugs and he might use drug, but talk about ways that you want to escape pain sometimes or feeling or not be present. Talk about how your smartphone becomes a drug for you when you don't want to be present with yourself. So that's kind of the list of things. Learn what he's learning, ask him questions so you show up as the student instead of the teacher, and then relate to him the best that you can. I love it. Thank you. You mentioned reading the books that they're learning. Well, first of all, you can just read the books that they're learning, that they're reading. So find out what they're reading. You can read those. The two books that I've written, one comes out on Monday, one's already out. Talk about this process that I'm talking to you about tonight. The Journey of the Heroic Parent, although it's focused more on parents, it's really for anybody. It talks about what mental health and illness is and where it comes from and understanding it. And then the Audacity to Be You broadens that topic to talk about marriage and other relationships, deepens it to talk about what it means to be a self, a person, and talks about how to find a therapist and where our mental illness shows up in our lives, even if we don't qualify for a diagnosis. Talks about myths and insights into kind of a more enlightened way of thinking about it instead of some kind of cookie cutter templated way of thinking about it. So those are a couple. My two books are The Journey of the Heroic Parent, out on Amazon right now, or The Audacity to Be You, which will be released Monday on Amazon. And then we have a whole library. The kids are asked to read Man's Search for Meaning and A Knight in Rusty Armor, which is a really easy read. We have podcasts on a lot of books. I have podcasts on a lot of books. So peruse our podcast library. All of these broadcasts go on the podcast app the next day. So go to Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, Finding You an Evoke Therapy Podcast, and subscribe and scroll through the topics there and find book reviews and ideas. Just learn. That's the best. Can you imagine that? That's the greatest gift that you can give to somebody, is to kind of be interested in their work. Somebody says, as a parent, it's very stressful for us. Yes, on that we all can agree. I have 4 children, and they have struggled at various times and varying ways and levels of intensity. And even the ones who've struggled less are still stressful. The ones who have struggled more, of course, are more stressed. That's why we need more support. That's why we provide you with podcasts, parent support groups, live broadcasts like these, books, assignments, right? Intensives, parent weekends, all of that. It's tremendously stressful. Raising children is something that we enter into with usually a sense of love, a sense that we're not going to do what our parents did, not going to make the mistakes that they made, and some idea that we'll teach our parents through how we teach our children through how we feel. If I get upset or angry, that should be evidence to the child that they know that they're doing something badly. If I'm happy or proud, then they're doing well. Unfortunately, that's a horrific recipe to help a child develop a healthy self, and we all do it. It took me 10 years as a therapist to figure out that that's the principal technique that parents use to raise their children, which is to tell the child how you feel as some kind of moral North Star for the child. And that we wonder why the child doesn't know themselves, why they are struggling with guilt and shame, why they are susceptible to peer pressure, because we've taught it to them. So there's a different way of doing this, and it's called providing a healthy attachment. It's part of what my two books talk about. Another great, if you go to my webpage, also drbradreedy.com, I have a list of books that are my 10 favorite in this field. I've included some of them, and I've done a podcast on all of them. Somebody writes, loved your book. Very helpful with our journey. Also, my son in Evoke now recommended Leadership and Self-Deception. Wow. It's a great book. It's a great book. I love Leadership and Self-Deception. I love its prequel even more, The Anatomy of Peace. I quoted in my first book. Great books. And a different language that I'm using tonight, but the exact same message. It's wonderful. All right, I'm going to go through upcoming events, take a couple of minutes, and then I'll take any last questions. We ask all current parents, we ask all parents, we invite all parents to come to any of the parent support groups that we hold across the country. We'll be in the Bay Area next Wednesday, the 26th at 7 to 9 p.m. at the San Mateo Marriott Airport. The San Mateo Marriott, excuse me. We'll be in Portland, Oregon on Friday, March 6th. And then we'll be in Southern California Sunday, April 5th. If you want more information or to RSVP, limited space available, email Kaysha, Kaysha, at evoketherapy.com. Okay? Kaysha. Find out more details, address, RSVP. Our next parent workshop, this is just for current parents. If you're a current parent, our next parent workshop is March 7th through 8th in our Utah location. We have those every month. If you want to do a deep dive into your work, this is something I do every year for myself. My children have done it. My wife does it. We send our employees, we pay for them to go to other people's intensives. If you want to know the most effective thing you can do for your own growth and help your family members, do intensive work. It's fantastic. It's 4.5 days. The one in March is full. We'll open another one if there's a need. In April, we have 4 spots left in April. There's one in May. I will be in England on May 8th through 10th. That will fill up. Finding You 2 is full in July, so we're going to open up another one. I'm coming out to Los Angeles for a Finding You weekend. So Los Angeles, Finding You, April 17th through 19th. Go to our website, email intensives@evoketherapy.com, or email Kaysha, Kaysha, at evoketherapy.com. Intensive pursuits trips are for young adults or families, adventure trips all over the world. Think therapy light or sober fun, customized for families or individuals. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups. Any combination of Al-Anon, Codependence Anonymous, or Families Anonymous. Adultchildren.org is a great place to go to if you grew up in a family you feel like had maybe some alcoholism or some real toxicity. Alateen is for teenagers. Refuge Recovery is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, less of an emphasis on a higher power. The National Alliance on Mental Illness can be found on NAMI by going to NAMI.org, where you can find free classes and resources in your area. All of these broadcasts are available on a podcast app, on an iPhone using the podcast app. On an Android device, we recommend the SoundCloud app, or you can go to soundcloud.com. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram by using the handle @EvokeTherapy, or our intensive program on Instagram by using @EvokeTherapyIntensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs. The Alumni Foundation is on Facebook under Evoke Family Foundation. Our blog has new content each week, like I mentioned earlier. My first book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available on Amazon. And by the time I talk to you next time, the new book, The Audacity to Be You, Learning to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self, is available this Monday on Amazon. So you can get it there. I'll be doing my next broadcast on Monday, the 24th. I haven't decided on a topic, but we'll get that out to you here in the next day or so. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being willing to put in the interest. Like I said, learn about this stuff. Ask your family member questions. And if you can, share some of your own work in this process. Would be the greatest gift that you could provide for your loved one that's been through Evoke. Or for anybody in your family, actually. So thank you for joining me this evening. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. Talk to you this coming Monday, the 24th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Take care, folks. Have a great week. Bye-bye.